Hello, in today's video we're going to be talking a little bit about variables in C#. We're going to introduce variables, so we're going to be talking about what a variable is in C#, how do we declare variables and how do we initialize variables, and then most importantly we're going to be talking about variable scope. And to do that we're going to use the same project that we have started last time in the strings video. So in this specific application we had the user enter a specific product to be purchased, and then whenever the user clicks on the add to cart, we have the application displaying the name of the product that was selected, and then a thank you message or thank you label that shows the words thank you and then the item that has been selected by the user. Now let's go back to the code and kind of look at what we did before. So in the previous video we talked about strings, and we talked about three different ways we can have strings or use strings in C#. We can have an empty string, and this is what we use to initialize or to have as an initial value for our label when we're loading the form. And then we can also use a static variable where we manually enter the text into our label, and that's also considered a string. Or we can use whatever text is entered by the user through the text box, and that is also a string. And we also talked about string concatenation, where we just concatenate several strings together using the plus sign. So we can create a long string using a few different strings and add them together, concatenate them together. So here in today's lecture we're going to be talking about variables, and the first variable we're going to be talking about is a string variable. So this is a variable of type string, and if you remember your Algebra 101, for variables you have a type of a variable and the name of the variable and the value of a variable. So if you think about your algebra, if you have a variable called x and holding a value of 5, and then x is an integer, so you have the value of the variable, that is 5, the name of the variable would be x, and then the type of the variable would be integer. Well, very similarly in C# you have a type of a variable, and today we're going to be creating a string variable, and we need to give it a name. So for this specific variable we're going to choose the name thank you str, and str for string, and then we're going to give it an initial value of nothing. So we're going to create an empty string variable. So here if you notice we have the type of the variable, which is string, we have the name of the variable, this is the thank you str, and we have the value of the variable. When we are naming variables, it's always good to use a meaningful name. So that would be a name that describes the variable, it describes the value of that variable. What are we going to store in that variable? So instead of using x and y and z, and when you're coding, it's a lot better to choose a meaningful name. And also as far as rules are concerned, when you're naming variables in C#, you can use uppercase or lowercase letters, you can use also underscore, but you cannot use any words that are specific to the .NET framework. So for example, you cannot name a variable void. So let's try to do that. If you want to create a string variable and call it void, let's set it equal to thank you. Let's save and start. And you see here that void is a keyword in C#, so it cannot be used as a name of a variable. And this is a very important rule to remember. You just cannot use names for variables that are used already by C#, because and if you think about it, it makes sense. if you do use these names as variables, these keywords as variable names, well then the .NET Framework will have a hard time differentiating between the role of that specific variable. Is it going to be something that is used by the .NET Framework, or is it something that's going to be used by the customized code that you just wrote? Okay, so that's as far as naming is concerned. For our specific variable here, what we're going to do is, after we create the variable, and let's add in some text to our variable. So our string variable now could hold the words thank you, or they could hold any string that we want it to use or want it to hold. And what we're going to do with this variable is, using a message box, we can show this variable. So in the show, instead of typing a string, we can use this variable. So let's try that and see how that's going to work. So let's say the user selects milk. We have a message box that shows up and says thank you. And then the rest of our code executes as before. So here, the first thing we want to do is really move our message box down here, because that should be the last thing that the user sees. Let's start it again. And see here, we populate this label, and then we populate this label, and then we show the message box saying thank you. Now, if you think about it, now we have redundant messages showing up for the user. We have the label, and then we have the message box that say about the same thing. What we can do is use this string variable and store this whole string right here in our variable and show that. So let's try and do that. So we're not going to change our message box code. What we're going to change instead is the code that we have that we are going to use to fill up our string variable. So the way to do that, or the way we assign values in C# for our variables, very similar to what we did here, is to just write the name of the variable, then the equal sign, and then we're just going to give it this exact same value. Just going to copy and paste it. Let's type that. Add to cart. And see here that our message has changed. Even though, if you have noticed, we have not changed this code at all. We have not changed the code that is related to the message box, because it is using this variable, and all we did is change the value of this variable. So note here that our variable had an initial value that says thank you, but then we changed the value of that variable right here to say thank you for your purchasing this item. So when we got to execute this line of code, the value of the thank you str had this whole string in it instead of the initial thank you. Okay, so now we can get rid of this line of code and try it again. And see here that we don't have anything showing up in our label, but instead we have a message box that shows our variable, or the value of our variable. Okay, so now we have seen how to create a variable of type string in C# and how to assign values of string type to our variables. Now, it is also important to note that the variable can hold only one value at a time. So at this time, right here, it was holding this this value, the thank you value, and then right here we changed the value of this variable to hold this whole string right here. Okay, so it is important to remember that only one value could be assigned to a string or to a variable at any specific time. So in here we have created the variable, we have declared our variable where we specify the type of the variable, the name of the variable, and an initial value. And then here we have assigned a value to the variable, and here we are using this variable inside the message box. Okay, now in this declaration part, there is a different way to do it, and that generic way is to simply use this data type, which is string, or the type of the variable, and the name of the variable. So we can take away this part right here. So we can declare a variable just by using the type of the variable and the name of the variable. So let's try that and see. And see here how the code works exactly the same way. Now, it is very important to note that C# will allow you to create a variable or to declare a variable without assigning an initial value. However, you absolutely need to fill out that value before you can use the variable. So let's say we comment out this part where we assign a value to the variable. So now what we have done is just create a variable of type string. We called it thank you str, and we use that variable in the message box. Let's try that and see what happens. Well, we get an error, and the error states that we are using a variable that has no value. And it makes sense because C# doesn't know what to do with this. It doesn't know what to show in the message box because we didn't give this string any value. We can give it a empty string, and that would work. And we have tried that before. So our message box will show up with an empty string, but that's still an assignment. We still gave a value to this variable. If we do declare this variable like this, we still need to have another statement where we fill up the value, or we assign a value to our string. So we can assign an empty string like this, and that would also work. But just using a variable without assigning any value to the variable would not really work. Okay? Now, the next step we're going to do is create another button. And this time, we'll call it exit. So in the text, we will type in exit. And then we will call this button the exit button. We will take away this label because we're not using it anymore. And we will have an exit button right here. Now, for this exit button, whenever we click on the exit button, we want the user to see the thank you for the purchase. Okay? So in here, whenever the user clicks on the exit button, we want to show the thank you message. So I will create or write a statement that uses a message box, and that message box would show thank you. Okay, let's start that. I still have, my thank you label doesn't exist anymore. So let me delete this line of code because we don't need it anymore. Let's start. Alright, test our application. So here we display the product that's been selected. We have this message box that we need to get rid of because we're not using it anymore. Now when the application or when the user clicks on the exit button, it should show our thank you message. So let's go back, delete this, then we can delete that. We can use this code right here. So now we have our string variable thank you str, and in this variable we have the value thank you for purchasing, then it has the item. Okay, and then when the user clicks on the exit button, it shows this message box. Perfect. Now let's modify this a little bit. Instead of showing thank you, let's show that customized message. So the way to do that, we can either take this code right here and paste it within the message box show like this. Or what we can do is use this variable. That will be a lot more simple, or a lot simpler, and it's a lot less code. But let's try that. I get an error, and the error states that the variable does not exist in the current context, and this is related to the variable scope, and that is our next topic. The variable scope refers to the area or the pieces of code where that variable could be used. Because we have declared this variable right here in this method right here does not see it or does not know what that variable is. So if you have noticed, we have two methods here. We have the buy now button click, so this is one method, and it starts with this curly bracket and it finishes with this curly bracket. And we have this new method, the exit button click, that starts with this bracket and ends with this one. Now, if we have declared the our string variable in this method, well, this method does not know anything about that variable, so we cannot use the variable thank you str in here in this method. What we would need to do is to define the variable again, or declare the variable again in here, and assign the value to that variable inside the exit button click method. And now we would be able to use that variable. Okay, and this is what we refer to in C# as variable scope. The variable is only seen by the method or where it was declared. Okay, so we can get rid of this code right here because we're not using it in this button, but we're using it in this method right here. We're not using it in this button click, but we're using it in this one. Okay, and that would still work. And see here how I was able to have the same string name in these two different methods. It's because these two methods don't really talk to each other. The variables declared in this method are not seen in this method, and vice versa. Okay, another way that I can do it, and if there is a variable that I would really need in all my methods, what I can do is to create that variable as a field. So instead of creating or declaring my variable here inside the method, what I can do is to declare it up front inside the class. So this is my class, and I declare my variable right here. But in here, it's not referred to as a variable, it's called a field. And to do so, I need to add the keyword private. So if I do this, I do not need to declare my variable within the method, because this variable, this field right here, could be used by any method within my class. Okay, so let's try that and see how that works. So I was able to use the variable or the field thank you str from this method right here. Now let's see if I can use it from any other method. So if I go back to my buy now button click and I assign a value to my thank you str, and then I use a message box show, and then I do display the value of my variable, it should work. So here, whenever I click on the add to carts, I can display my message because I'm using my thank you str, and also in here I'm using my thank you str, so I can use that variable in either method, because that variable could be used by any method within this class, because the scope of this variable right now is within these two curly brackets right here, which includes all the methods that I have here inside. All right, and that concludes our video for today. See you next time.